Welcome. Thank you for joining me today. Forgive me if I sound a little bit sick. I've been fighting a cold, but I have wanted to finish the story for you for ages. In the back, you're hearing the crackling of my fireplace. It's there to make us both cozy, to get us in the most relaxed mindset. I would like for you to lie back, close your eyes, and let the worry from your day drift away. Now, hold out your left arm and take the fingers of your right hand and gently draw shapes on your forearm. Enjoy the feel of the gentle touch as you begin to relax. If you'd like, you can keep your eyes closed as I read to you. Today's reading is part 2 of The Life and Adventures of Santa Claus, written by Frank L. Baum. When Claus came, the valley was empty, save for the grass, the brook, the wildflowers, the bees, and the butterflies. If he would make his home here and live after the fashion of men, he must have a house. This puzzled him at first, but while he stood smiling in the sunshine, he suddenly found beside him old Nelko, the servant of the Master Woodsman. Nelko bore an axe, strong and broad, with blade that gleamed like burnished silver. This he placed in the young man's hand, and then disappeared without a word. Claus understood, and turning to the forest edge, he selected a number of fallen tree trunks, which he began to clear of their dead branches. He would not cut into a living tree. His life among the nymphs who guarded the forest had taught him that a live tree is sacred, being a created thing endowed with feelings. But with the dead and fallen trees, it was different. They had fulfilled their destiny as active members of the forest community, and now it was fitting that their remains should minister to the needs of man. The axe bit deep into the logs at every stroke. It seemed to have a force of its own, and Claus had but to swing and guide it. When shadows began creeping over the green hills to lie in the valley overnight, the young man had chopped many logs into equal lengths and proper shapes for building a house, such as he had seen the poorer classes of men inhabit. Then, resolving to await another day before he tried to fit the logs together, Claus ate some of the sweet roots he well knew how to find. He drank deeply from the laughing brook, and he lay down to sleep on the grass, first seeking a spot where no flowers grew, lest the weight of his body should crush them. And while he slumbered and breathed in the perfume of the wondrous valley, the spirit of happiness crept into his heart and drove out all terror and care and misgivings. Nevermore would the face of Claus be clouded with anxieties. Nevermore would the trials of life weigh him down as with a burden. The Laughing Valley had claimed him for its own. Would that we all might live in that delightful place, but then, maybe, it would become overcrowded. For ages, it had awaited a tenant. Was it chance that led young Claus to make his home in this happy vale? Or may we guess that it was his thoughtful friends, the immortals, who had directed his steps when he wandered away from Burzee to seek a home in the great wide world? Certain it is that while the moon peered above the hilltop and flooded with its soft beams the body of the sleeping stranger, the Laughing Valley was filled with the happy and crooked shapes of the friendly nooks. The nooks spoke no words, but worked with skill and swiftness. The logs rocks Claus had trimmed with his bright axe were carried to a spot beside the brook and fitted one upon another. And during the night a strong and roomy dwelling was built. The birds came sweeping into the valley at daybreak, and their songs, so seldom heard in the deep wood, aroused the stranger. He rubbed the web of sleep from his eyelids and looked around. The house met his gaze. "I must thank the Nooks for this," said he gratefully. Then he walked to his dwelling and entered the doorway. A large room faced him, having a fireplace at the end and a table and a bench in the middle. Beside the fireplace was a cupboard. Another doorway was beyond. Claus entered here also and saw a smaller room with a bed against the wall and a stool set near a small stand. On the bed were many layers of dried moss brought from the forest. "Indeed, this is a palace," exclaimed the smiling Claus. "I must thank the good Nooks again for their knowledge of man's needs, as well as for their labors in my behalf." He left his new home with a glad feeling that he was not quite alone in the world, although he had chosen to abandon his forest life. Friendships are not easily broken, and the immortals are everywhere. Upon reaching the brook, he drank of the pure water, and then he sat down on the bank to laugh at the mischievous gambols of the ripples as they pushed one another against the rooks and the rocks, and crowded desperately to see which should first reach the turn beyond. And as they raced away, he listened to the song they sang. "Rushing, pushing, on we go. Not a wave may gently flow. All are too excited. Every drop delighted turns to spray in the merry play as we tumble on our way." Next Claus searched for roots to eat, while the daffodils turned their little eyes up at him laughingly and lisped their dainty song. "Blooming fairly, growing rarely, never flowerets were so gay. Perfume breathing, joy bequeathing, as our colors we display." It made Claus laugh to hear the little things in their voice, such happiness, as they nodded gracefully on their stems. But another strain caught his ear as sunbeams fell gently across his face, and they whispered, "Here is gladness, that our rays warm the valley through the days. Here is happiness, to give comfort unto all who live." "Yes," cried Claus in answer. "There is happiness and joy in all things here. The Laughing Valley is a valley of peace and goodwill." He passed the day talking with the ants and beetles and exchanging jokes with the light-hearted butterflies. And at night he lay on his bed of soft moss and slept soundly. Then came the fairies, merry but noiseless, bringing skillets and pots and dishes and pans and all the tools necessary to prepare food and comfort to a mortal. With these, they filled his cupboard and fireplace, and finally placed a stout suit of full clothing on the stool beside his bed. When Claus awoke, he rubbed his eyes again and laughed, and spoke aloud his thanks to the fairies and the Master Woodsman who had sent them. With eager joy, he examined all of his possessions, wondering what some might be used for. But in the days when he had clung to the girdle of the great axe and visited the cities of men, his eyes had been quick to note all of the manners and customs of the race to which he belonged. So he guessed from the gifts brought by the fairies that the master expected him hereafter to live in the fashion of his fellow creatures, which means that I must plow the earth and plant corn, he reflected, so that when winter comes, I shall have garnered food in plenty. But as he stood in the grassy valley, he saw that to turn up the earth in furrows would be to destroy hundreds of pretty, helpless flowers, as well as thousands of the tender blades of grass, and this he could not bear to do. Therefore, he stretched out his arms and uttered a peculiar whistle that he had learned in the forest, afterward crying, "Ryals of the field flowers, come to me." Instantly, a dozen of the little Ryals were squatting upon the ground before him, and they nodded to him in cheerful greeting. Claus gazed upon them earnestly. "Your brothers of the forest," he said, "I have known and loved for many years. I shall love you also when we have become friends. To me, the laws of the Ryals, whether those of the forest or of the field, are sacred. I have never willfully destroyed one of the flowers you tend so carefully, but I must plant grain to use for food during the cold winter. And how am I to do this without killing the little creatures that sing to me so prettily of their fragrant blossoms?" The yellow Ryle, he who tends the buttercups, made answer, "Fret not, friend Claus. The great Ak has spoken to us of you. There is better work for you in life than to labor for food, and though, not being of the forest, Ak has no command over us, nevertheless we are glad to favor one he loves. Live, therefore, to do the good work you are resolved to undertake. We, the field Ryals, will attend to your food supplies." After this speech, the Ryals were no longer to be seen, and Claus drove from his mind the thought of tilling the earth. When next he wandered back to his dwelling, a bowl of fresh milk stood upon the table. Bread was in the cupboard, and sweet honey filled the dish beside it. A pretty basket of rosy apples and new plucked grapes was also awaiting him. He called out, "Thank you, my friends," to the invisible Ryals, and straightway began to eat the food. Thereafter, when hungry, he had but to look in the cupboard to find goodly supplies brought by the kindly Ryals, and the nooks cut and stacked much wood for his fireplace, and the fairies brought him warm blankets and clothing. So began his life in the Laughing Valley, with the favor and friendship of the immortals to minister to his every want. Truly, our Claus had wisdom, for his good fortune but strengthened his resolve to befriend the little ones of his own race. He knew his plan was approved by the immortals, else they would not have favored him so greatly. So he began at once to make acquaintance with mankind. He walked through the valley to the plain beyond, and crossed the plain in many directions to reach the abodes of men. These stood singly or in groups of dwellings called villages, and in nearly all the houses, whether big or small, Claus found children. The youngsters soon came to know his merry, laughing face, and the kind glance of his bright eyes, and the parents, while they regarded the young man with some scorn for loving children more than the elders, the parents were content that the girls and boys had found a playfellow who seemed willing to amuse them. So the children romped and played games with Claus, and the boys rode upon his shoulders, and the girls nestled in his strong arms, and the babies clung fondly to his knees. Wherever the young man chanced to be, the sound of childish laughter followed him. And to understand this better, you must know that children were much neglected in those days. and received little attention from their parents, so that it became to them a marvel that so goodly a man as Claus devoted his time to making them happy. And those who knew him were, you may be sure, very happy indeed. The sad faces of the poor and abused grew bright for once. The cripple smiled despite his misfortune. The ailing ones hushed their moans, and the grieved ones their cries, when their merry friend came nigh to comfort them. Only at the beautiful palace of the Lord of Lurd, and at the frowning castle of the Baron Braun, was Claus refused admittance. There were children at both places, but the servants at the palace shut the door in the stranger's face, and the fierce Baron threatened to hang him from an iron hook on the castle walls. Whereupon Claus sighed and went back to the poorer dwellings, where he was welcome. After a time, the winter grew near. The flowers lived out their lives and faded and disappeared. The beetles burrowed far into the warm earth. The butterflies deserted their meadows, and the voice of the brook grew hoarse, as if it had taken on a cold. One day snowflakes filled all the air in the Laughing Valley, dancing boisterously toward the earth, with clothing in pure white raiment of the roof of Claus' dwelling. At night, Jack Frost rapped at the door. "Come in," cried Claus. "Come out," answered Jack, "for you have a fire inside." So Claus came out. He had known Jack Frost in the forest, and liked the jolly rogue, even when he mistrusted him. "There will be a rare sport for me tonight, Claus," shouted the sprite. "Isn't this glorious weather? I shall nip scores of noses and ears and toes before daybreak." "If you love me, Jack, spare the children," begged Claus. "And why?" asked the other in surprise. "They are tender and helpless," answered Claus. "But I love to nip the tender ones," declared Jack. "The older ones are tough and tire my fingers." "The young ones are weak and cannot fight you," said Claus. "True," said Jack thoughtfully. "Well, I will not pinch a child this night, and if I can resist the temptation," he promised. "Good night, Claus." "Good night," answered Claus. The young man went in and closed his door, and Jack Frost ran on to the nearest village. Claus threw a log in the fire, which burned up brightly. Beside the hearth sat Blinky, a big cat given to him by Peter the Knook. Her fur was soft and glossy, and she purred never-ending songs of contentment. "I shall not see the children again soon," said Claus to the cat, who kindly paused in her song to listen. "The winter is upon us. The snow will be deep for many days, and I shall be unable to play with my little friends." The cat raised a paw and stroked her nose thoughtfully, but made no reply. So long as the fire burned, and Claus sat in his easy chair by the hearth, she did not mind the weather. So passed many days and many long evenings. The cupboard was always full, but Claus became weary with having nothing to do more than to feed the fire from the big wood pile that the Knooks had brought inside. One evening he picked up a stick of wood and began to cut it with his sharp knife. He had no thought, at first, except to occupy his time, and he whistled and sang to the cat as he carved away portions of the stick. Puss sat up on her haunches and watched him, listening at the same time to her master's merry whistle. She loved the sound even more than her own purring songs. Claus glanced at the puss, and then at the stick he was whittling, until presently the wood began to have a shape, and the shape was like the head of a cat, with 2 ears sticking upward. Claus stopped whistling to laugh, and then both he and the cat looked at the wooden image in some surprise. Then he carved out the eyes and the nose, and rounded lower part of the head so it rested upon a neck. The cat hardly knew what to make of it now and sat up stiffly, as if watching with some suspicion what would come next. Claus knew. The head had given him an idea. He plied his knife carefully and with skill formed slowly the body of a cat. He made this to sit upon its haunches as the real cat did, with her tail wound around her 2 front legs. The work cost him much time, but the evening was long and he had nothing better to do. Finally, he gave a loud and delighted laugh at the result of his labors, and placed the wooden cat, now completed, upon the hearth opposite the real one. The cat thereupon glared at her image. She raised her hair in anger, and uttered a defiant meow. The wooden cat paid her no attention, and Claus, much amused, laughed again. Then Blinky advanced towards the wooden image to eye it closely and smell of it intelligently. Eyes and nose told her the creature was wood in spite of its natural appearance. So the cat resumed her seat and her purring, but as she neatly washed her face with her padded paw, she cast more than once admiring glances at her clever master. Perhaps she felt the same satisfaction we feel when we look upon good photographs of ourselves. The cat's master was himself pleased with his handiwork, without knowing exactly why. Indeed, he had great cause to congratulate himself that night, and all the children throughout the world should have joined him in rejoicing, for Claus had made his first toy. A hush lay on the Laughing Valley now. Snow covered it like a white spread, and pillows of downy flakes drifted before the dwelling where Claus sat feeding the blaze of his fire. The brook gurgled on beneath a heavy sheet of ice, and all living plants and insects nestled close to Mother Earth to keep warm. The face of the moon was hidden by dark clouds, and the wind, delighting in the wintry sport, pushed and whirled the snowflakes in so many directions that they could get no chance to fall to the ground. Claus heard the wind whistling and shrieking in its play, and thanked the good Nooks again for his comfortable shelter. Blinky washed her face lazily and stared at the coals with a look of pure content. The toy cat sat opposite the real one and gazed straight ahead as toy cats should. Suddenly, Claus heard a noise that sounded different from the voice of the wind. It was more like a wail of suffering and despair. He stood up and listened, but the wind, growing boisterous, shook the door and rattled the windows to distract his attention. He waited until the wind was tired, and then, still listening, he heard once more the shrill cry of distress. Quickly, he drew on his coat, pulled his cap over his eyes, and opened the door. The wind dashed in and scattered the embers over the hearth, at the same time blowing Blinky's fur so furiously that she crept under the table to escape. Then the door was closed, and Claus was outside, peering anxiously into the darkness. The wind laughed and scolded and tried to push him over, but he stood firm. The helpless flakes stumbled against his eyes and dimmed his sight, but he rubbed them away and looked again. Snow was everywhere, white and glittering. It covered the earth, and it filled the air. The cry was not repeated. Claus turned to go back into the house, but the wind caught him unaware, and he stumbled and fell across a snowdrift. His hand plunged into the drift and touched something that was not snow. This he seized, and, pulling it gently toward him, found it to be a child. The next moment he had lifted it into his arms and carried it into his house. The wind followed him through the door, but Claus shut it quickly. He laid the rescued child on the hearth, and brushing away the snow, he discovered it to be Weekum, a little boy who lived in a house beyond the valley. Claus wrapped a warm blanket around the little one and rubbed the frost from its limbs. Before long, the child opened his eyes and, seeing where he was, smiled happily. Then Claus warmed milk and fed it to the boy slowly, while the cat looked on with sober curiosity. Finally, the little one curled up in his new friend's arms and sighed and fell asleep. Claus, filled with gladness that he had found the wanderer, held him closely while he slumbered. The wind, finding no more mischief to do, climbed the hill and swept on toward the north. This gave the weary snowflakes time to settle down to earth, and the valley became still again. The boy, having slept well in the arms of his friend, opened his eyes and sat up. Then, as a child will, he looked around the room and saw all that it contained. "Your cat is a nice cat, Claus," he said at last. "Can I hold it?" But Puss objected and ran away. "The other cat won't run, Claus," continued the boy. "Let me hold that one." Claus placed the toy in the boy's arms, and the boy held it lovingly and kissed the tip of its wooden ear. "How did you get lost in the storm, Weekum?" asked Claus. "I started to walk to my auntie's house and lost my way." "Were you frightened?" asked Claus. "It was cold," said Weekum, "and the snow got in my eyes so I could not see. Then I kept on until I fell in the snow without knowing where I was, and the wind blew the flakes over me and covered me up." Claus gently stroked his head, and the boy looked up at him and smiled. "I'm all right now," said Weekum. "Yes," replied Claus happily. "Now I will put you into my warm bed, and you must sleep until morning, when I will carry you back to your mother." "May the cat sleep with me?" asked the boy. "Yes, if you wish it to," answered Claus. "It's a nice cat," Weekum said, smiling, as Claus tucked the blankets around him, and presently the little one fell asleep with the wooden toy in his arms. When morning came, the sun climbed the laughing valley and flooded it with his rays. So Claus prepared to take the lost child back to his mother. "May I keep the cat?" Claus asked Weekum. "It's nicer than real cats. It doesn't run away or scratch or bite. May I keep it?" "Yes, indeed," answered Claus, pleased that the toy he had made could give pleasure to this child. So he wrapped the boy and the wooden cat in a warm cloak, perching the bundle upon his own broad shoulders, and then he tramped through the snow and the drifts of the valley, and across the plain, beyond the poor cottage where Weekum's mother lived. "See, Mama," cried the boy as he entered. "I've got a cat." The good woman wept tears of joy over the rescue of her darling, and thanked Claus many times for his kind act. So he carried a warm and happy heart back to his home in the valley. That night he said to his cat, "I believe the children will love the wooden cats almost as well as the real ones. They can't hurt them by pulling their tails and ears. I'll make another." So this was the beginning of his great work. The next cat was better made than the first. While Claus sat with it whittling it out, the yellow Ryle came in to make him a visit, and so pleased was he with the man's skill that he ran away and brought several of his fellows. There came the red Ryle, the black Ryle, the green Ryle, the blue Ryle, and the yellow Ryle, in a circle on the floor, while Claus whittled and whistled, and the wooden cat grew into shape. "If it could be made the same color as the real cat, no one would know the difference," said the yellow Ryle thoughtfully. "The little ones, maybe, would not know the difference," replied Claus, pleased with the idea. I will bring you some of the red that I colored my roses and tulips with, said the red vial, and then you can make the cat's lips and tongue red. I will bring some of the green that I colored my grasses and leaves with, said the green vial, and then you can color the cat's eyes green. They will need a bit of yellow also, remarked the yellow vial. I must fetch some of the yellow that I used to color my buttercups and goldenrods with. The real cat is black, said the black vial. I will bring some of the black that I used to color the eyes of my pansies with, and then you can paint your wooden cat black. I see you have a blue ribbon around Blinky's neck, added the blue vial. I will get some of the color that I used to paint the bluebells and forget-me-nots with, and then you can carve a wooden ribbon on the toy cat's neck and paint it blue. So the vials disappeared, and by the time Claus had finished carving out the form of the cat, they were all back with the paints and brushes, as promised. They made Blinky sit up on the table, that Claus might paint the cat toy just the right color. And when the work was done, the vials declared it was exactly as good as the live cat. That is, to all appearances, added the red vial. Blinky seemed a little offended by the attention bestowed upon the toy, and that she might not seem to approve the imitation cat, she walked to the corner of the hearth and sat down with a dignified air. But Claus was delighted, and as soon as morning came, he started out and tramped through the snow, across the valley, across the plain, until he came to a village. There, in a poor hut near the walls of the beautiful palace of the Lord of Lurd, a little girl lay upon a wretched cot, moaning in pain. Claus approached the girl and kissed her and comforted her, and then he drew the toy cat from beneath his coat, where he had hidden it, and placed it in her arms. Ah, how well he felt himself repaid for his labor and his long walk, when he saw the little one's eyes grow bright with pleasure. She hugged the kitty tight to her breast, as if it had been a precious gem. It would not let go for a single moment. The fever was quieted, the pain grew less, and she fell into a sweet and refreshing sleep. Claus laughed and whistled and sang all the way home. Never had he been so happy as on that day. When he entered his house, he found Shigra, the lioness, awaiting him. Since his babyhood, Shigra had loved Claus, and while he dwelt in the forest, she had often come to visit him at Nicile's bower. After Claus had gone to live with the Laughing Valley, Shigra became lonely and ill at ease, and now she had braved the snowdrifts, which all lions abhor, to see him once more. Shigra was getting old, and her teeth were falling out, while the hairs that tipped her ears and tail had changed from tawny yellow to white. Claus found her lying on his hearth, and he put his arms around the neck of the lioness and hugged her lovingly. The cat had retired to a far corner. She did not care to associate with Shigra. Claus told his old friend about the cats he had made, and how much pleasure they had given Weekum and the sick girl. Shigra did not know much about the children. Indeed, if she met a child, she could scarcely be trusted not to devour it. But she was interested in Claus' new labors and said, "These images seem to be very attractive, yet I cannot see why you should make cats, which are very unimportant animals. Suppose, now that I am here, you make the image of a lioness, the queen of all beasts. Then indeed your children will be happy and safe at the same time." Claus thought this a good suggestion, so he got a piece of wood and sharpened his knife, while Shigra crouched upon the hearth at his feet. With much care he carved the head in the likeness of the lioness, even to the two fierce teeth that curved over her lower lip and the deep frowning lines above her wide-open eyes. When it was finished, he said, "You have a terrible look, Shigra." "Then the image is like me," she answered, "for I am indeed terrible to all who are not my friends." Next, Claus carved out her body, with Shigra's long tail trailing behind it. The image of the crouching lioness was very lifelike. "It pleases me," said Shigra, yawning and stretching her body gracefully. "Now I will watch while you paint." Claus brought the paints the Riles had given him from the cupboard and colored the image to resemble the real Shigra. Lioness placed her big padded paws upon the edge of the table and raised herself while she carefully examined the toy that was her likeness. "You are indeed skillful," she said proudly. "The children will like that better than the cat, I am sure." Then, snarling at Blinky, who arched her back in terror and whined fearfully, Shigra walked away toward her forest home with stately strides. The winter was over now, and all the Laughing Valley was filled with joyous excitement. The brook was so happy at being free once again that it gurgled more boisterously than ever and dashed so recklessly against the rocks that it sent showers of spray high into the air. The grass thrust its sharp little blades upward through the mat of dead stalks where it had hidden from the snow. But the flowers were yet too timid to show themselves, although the Riles were busy feeding their roots. The sun was in remarkably good humor and sent his rays dancing merrily throughout the valley. Claus was eating his dinner one day when he heard a timid knock at the door. "Come in," he called. No one entered, but after a pause came another rapping. Claus jumped up and threw open the door. Before him stood a small girl holding a smaller brother fast by the hand. "Is that you, Claus?" she asked shyly. "Indeed, I am, my dear," he answered with a laugh, as he caught both children in his arms and kissed them. "You are very welcome, and you have come just in time to share my dinner." He took them to the table and fed them with fresh milk and nut cakes. When they had eaten enough, he asked, "Why have you made this journey to see me?" "I want a cat," replied little Mary and her brother, who had not yet learned to speak many words, nodded his head and exclaimed like an echo, "A cat?" "Oh, you want my toy cats, do you?" returned Claus, greatly pleased to discover that his creations were so popular with children. The little visitors nodded eagerly. "Unfortunately," Claus continued, "I have but one cat ready for now, for I carried 2 to children in the town yesterday, and the one I have I shall give to your brother, Mary, because he is smaller, and the next one I shall make for you." The boy's face was bright with smiles as he took the precious toy Claus held out to him, but little Mary covered her face with her arms and began to sob grievously. "But I want a cat now," she wailed. Her disappointment made Claus feel miserable for a moment, and then he suddenly remembered Shigra. "Don't cry, darling," he said soothingly. "I have a toy much nicer than a cat, and you shall have this toy." He went to the cupboard and drew out the image of the lioness, which he placed on the table before Mary. The girl raised her arm and gave one glance at the fierce teeth and glaring eyes of the beast, and then she uttered a terrifying scream and ran from the house. The boy followed her, also screaming loudly and even dropping his precious cat in his fear. For a moment, Claus stood motionless, being puzzled and astonished. Then he threw Shigra's image into the cupboard and ran after the children, calling to them to not be frightened. Little Mary stopped in her flight, and her brother clung to her skirt. But they both cast fearful glances at the house until Claus had assured them many times that the beast had been locked in the cupboard. "Yet why were you frightened at seeing it?" he asked. "It's only a toy to play with." "It's bad," said Mary decidedly, "and it's horrid and not nice like the cats." "Perhaps you are right," returned Claus thoughtfully. "But if you will return with me to my house, I shall make you a pretty cat." So they timidly entered the house again, having faith in Claus's words, and afterward they had the joy of watching Claus carve out a cat from a bit of wood and paint it in natural colors. It did not take him long to do this, for he had become skillful with his knife at this time, and Mary loved her toy the more dearly because she had seen it being made. After his little visitors had trotted away on their journey homeward, Claus sat long in deep thought, and he then decided that such fierce creatures as his friend the lioness would never do as models from which to fashion his toys. There must be nothing to frighten the dear children, he reflected, and while I know she grew well, and I am not afraid of her, it is natural that children should look upon her image and feel fear. Hereafter, I will choose such mild-mannered animals as squirrels and rabbits and deer and lambkins, and I will carve my toys, for then the little ones will love rather than fear them. He began his work that very next day, and before bedtime he had made a wooden rabbit and a lamb. They were not quite so lifelike as the cats had been, because they were formed from memory, while Blinky had sat very still for Claus to look at while he worked. But the new toys pleased the children nevertheless, and the fame of Claus's playthings quickly spread to every cottage on the plain and in the village. He always carried his gifts to the sick or crippled children, but those who were strong enough walked to the house in the valley to ask for them. So the little path was soon worn from the plain to the door of the toy maker's cottage. First came the children who had been playmates to Claus before he began to make toys. These, you may be sure, were well supplied. Then children who lived farther away heard of the wonderful images and made journeys to the valley to secure them. All little ones were welcome, and never a one went away empty-handed. This demand for his handiwork kept Claus busily occupied, but he was quite happy in knowing the pleasure he had given to so many of the dear children. His friends, the immortals, were pleased with his success and supported him bravely. The Knooks selected for him clear pieces of soft wood, that his knife might not be blunted in cutting them. The Ryles kept him supplied with paints of all colors and brushes fashioned from the tips of timothy grasses. The fairies discovered that the workmen needed saws and chisels and hammers and nails, as well as knives, and brought him a goodly array of such tools. Claus soon turned his living room into a most wonderful workshop. He built a bench before the window and arranged his tools and paints so that he could reach everything as he sat on his stool. And as he finished toy after toy to delight the hearts of little children, he found himself growing so happy that he could not refrain from singing and laughing and whistling all the day long. "It's because I live in the Laughing Valley, where everything else laughs," said Claus. But that was not the reason. One day, as Claus sat before his door to enjoy the sunshine, while he busily carved the head and horns of a toy deer, he looked up and discovered a glittering cavalcade of horsemen approaching through the valley. When they drew nearer, he saw that the band consisted of a score of men-at-arms. They were clad in bright armor, and bore in their hands spears and battle-axes. In front of these rode little Bessie Blithesome, the pretty daughter of that proud Lord of Lerne, who had once driven Claus from his palace. Her palfrey was pure white. Its bridle was covered with glittering gems, and its saddle draped with cloth of gold, richly broidered. The soldiers were sent to protect her from harm while she journeyed. Claus was surprised, but he continued to whittle and to sing until the cavalcade drew up before him. Then the little girl leaned over the neck of her palfrey and said, "Please, Mr. Claus, I want a toy." Her voice was so pleading that Claus jumped up at once and stood beside her. But he was puzzled how to answer her request. "You are a rich lord's daughter," said he, "and have all that you desire." "Except toys," added Bessie. "There are no toys in the world but yours." "And I make them for the poor children who have nothing else to amuse them," continued Claus. "Do poor children love to play with toys more than rich ones?" asked Bessie. "I suppose not," said Claus thoughtfully. "Am I to blame because my father is a lord? Must I be denied the pretty toys I long for because other children are poorer than I am?" she inquired earnestly. "I am afraid you must, my dear," he answered, "for the poor have nothing else with which to amuse themselves. You have your pony to ride, your servants to wait on you, and every comfort that money can procure. But I want toys," cried Bessie, wiping away the tears that forced themselves into her eyes. "If I cannot have them, I shall be very unhappy." Claus was troubled, for her grief recalled to him the thought that his desire was to make all children happy, without regard to their condition in life. Yet while so many poor children were clamoring for his toys, he could not bear to give one of them to Bessie Blithesome, who had so much already to make her happy. "Listen, my child," he said gently. "All the toys I am now making are promised to others. But the next toy shall be yours, since your heart so longs for it. Come to me again in 2 days, and it shall be ready for you." Bessie gave a cry of delight, and, leaning over her pony's neck, kissed Claus prettily upon his forehead. Then, calling to her men-at-arms, she rode happily away, leaving Claus to resume his work. "If I am to supply the rich children as well as the poor ones," he thought, "I shall not have a spare moment in the whole year. But is it right I should give to the rich at all? Surely I must go to Necile and talk with her about this matter." So when he had finished the toy deer, which was very much like a deer he had known in the forest glades, he went to Burzee and made his way to the bower of the beautiful nymph Necile, who had been his foster mother. She greeted him tenderly and lovingly, listening with interest to his story of the visit of Bessie Blithesome. "And now tell me," said he, "shall I give toys to the rich children?" "We of the forest know nothing of riches," she replied. "It seems to me that one child is like every other child, since they are all made of the same clay, and that riches are like a gown, which may be put on or taken away, leaving the child unchanged. But the fairies are guardians of mankind, and know mortal children better than I. Let us call upon the fairy queen." This was done, and the queen of the fairies sat beside them and heard Claus relate his reasons for thinking the rich children could get along without his toys, and also what the nymph had said. "Necile is right," declared the queen, "for whether it be rich or poor, a child's longings for pretty playthings are but natural. Rich Bessie's heart may suffer as much grief as poor Mary's. She can be just as lonely and discontented, and just as happy. I think, friend Claus, it is your duty to make all little ones glad. whether they chance to live in palaces or in cottages. Your words are wise, fair queen, replied Claus, and my heart tells me they are just as they are wise. Hereafter, all children may claim my services. Then he bowed before the gracious fairy, and, kissing Necile, went back into his valley. At the brook he stopped to drink, and afterward he sat on the bank and took a piece of moist clay into his hands. He thought of what sort of toy he should make for Bessie Blithesome. He did not notice that his fingers were working the clay into shapes until, glancing downward, he found he had unconsciously formed a head that bore a slight resemblance to the nymph Necile. At once he became interested. Gathering more of the clay from the bank, he carried it into his house. Then, with the aid of his knife and a bit of wood, he succeeded in working the clay into the image of the toy nymph. With skillful strokes, he formed long, waving hair on the head and covered the body with a gown of oak leaves. Her 2 feet were sticking out of the bottom and were clad in sandals. But the clay was soft, and Claus found he must handle it gently to avoid ruining his pretty work. Perhaps the rays of the sun will draw out the moisture and cause the clay to become hard, he thought. So he laid the image on a flat board and placed it in the glare of the sun. This done, he went to his bench and began painting the toy deer. And soon he became so interested in the work that he forgot all about the clay nymph. But next morning, happening to notice it as it lay on the board, he found the sun had baked it to the hardness of stone, and it was strong enough to be safely handled. Claus now painted the nymph with great care in the likeness of Necile, giving it deep blue eyes, white teeth, rosy lips, and ruddy brown hair. The gown he colored oak leaf green, and when the paint was dry, Claus himself was charmed with the new toy. Of course, it was not nearly so lovely as the real Necile, but, considering the material of which it was made, Claus thought it was very beautiful. When Bessie, riding upon her white palfrey, came to his dwelling the next day, Claus presented her with the new toy. The little girl's eyes were brighter than ever as she examined the pretty creature, and she loved it at once, and she held it close to her breast as a mother does to a child. "What is it called, Claus?" she asked. Now Claus knew that nymphs do not like to be spoken of by mortals, so he could not tell Bessie it was an image of Necile he had given her. But, as it was a new toy, he searched his mind for a new name to call it by, and the first word he thought of he decided would do very well. "This is called a doll, my dear," he said to Bessie. "I shall call the dolly my baby," returned Bessie, kissing it fondly, "and I shall tend to it and care for it just as nurse cares for me. Thank you very much, Claus. Your gift has made me happier than I have ever been before." Then she rode away, hugging the toy in her arms, and Claus, seeing her delight, thought he would make another doll, better and more natural than the first. He brought more clay from the brook, and, remembering that Bessie had called the doll her baby, he resolved to form this one into a baby's image. That was no difficult task to the clever workman, and soon the baby doll was lying on the board and placed in the sun to dry. Then, with the clay that was left, he began to make an image of Bessie Blithesome herself. This was not so easy, for he had found he could not make the silken robe of the Lord's daughter out of the common clay. So he called the fairies to his aid and asked them to bring him colored silks with which to make a real dress for the clay image. The fairies set off at once on their errand, and before nightfall they returned with a generous supply of silks and laces and golden threads. Claus now became impatient to complete his new doll, and instead of waiting for the next day's sun, he placed the clay image upon his hearth and covered it over with glowing coals. By morning, when he drew the doll from the ashes, it had baked as hard as if it had lain a full day in the hot sun. Now our Claus became a dressmaker as well as a toy maker. He cut the lavender silk and nearly sewed it into a beautiful gown that just fitted the dolly, and he put a lace collar around its neck and pink shoes on its feet. The natural color of baked clay is a light gray, but Claus painted the face to resemble the color of flesh, and he gave the doll Bessie's brown eyes and golden hair and rosy cheeks. It was really a beautiful thing to look upon, and sure to bring joy to some childish heart. While Claus was admiring it, he heard a knock at his door, and little May re-entered. Her face was sad and her eyes red, and she continued weeping. "Why, what has you grieved, my dear?" asked Claus, taking the child into his arms. "I broke my cat," sobbed Mary. "How?" he inquired, his eyes twinkling. "I dropped him and broke off his tail, and then I dropped him and broke off his ear, and now he's all spoiled." Claus laughed. "Never mind, Mary dear," he said. "How would you like this new dolly instead of a cat?" Mary looked at the silk-robed doll, and her eyes grew bright with astonishment. "Oh, Claus," she cried, clapping her hands together with rapture. "Can I have a beautiful lady?" "Do you like it?" he asked. "I love it," she said, "and it's better than the cat." "Then take it, dear, and be careful not to break this one." Mary took the doll with a joy that was almost reverent, and her face dimpled with smiles as she started along the path toward home. This concludes our reading for today. Thank you for listening. Have a very sweet